Hello Desert Bearhawk fans. We're in the shop today. And today we're doing kind of a retro video, at least for me because I've already passed this spot, but as my Facebook and YouTube channel have many subscribers that are building Bearhawks, I get questions all the time. And today I was asked a question by a fella regarding the rib forms and how I made them and what methodology I used to come up with what I came up with. So I went to my storage unit and I drug out some of my forms to hopefully be able to show an example of what I did and how I did it. I know I have a video out for the nose ribs, but this will be a little bit more information. The upside of it is that after all my careful planning and hard work, you can see that, let's see, where can we find one? You can see that the ribs are sitting perfectly square with the bottom and the top of my spars. So the effort I made a year ago is paying off now as I put my wings together. So we got to try to help each other out there. If somebody knows something or could pass some information on, then that's what you got to do, and that's what I'm doing here. So let's get right to it. All right, this board, this form right here that you can see is my master rib template. Master template. Everything that I've made as far as ribs are concerned involved this master form right here. Now the way I made that was I took my Mylar drawing, which is right here. Let's see, I'm doing this with an iPhone, so it's going to be a little sketchy one-handed, but we'll work our way through it. I cut my Mylar drawing out with scissors, very close to, let me get a lead block here to lock that down, and that'll work. Very close to, if not exactly, right on the line. You can see that there. And that gave me the basic shape of the master rib. Then the next thing I did is I took this Mylar sheet and I sprayed it with some 3M77 spray adhesive. It's a spray contact cement. Just lightly dusted it. And I lightly dusted this block, and I mean lightly. Then what I did is I just rolled this form out on this, imagine this being a blank piece of MDF that isn't cut to shape. So I basically glued this form, or this template rather, down to the MDF sheet that I was working with. And this is, by the way, this is 1 inch thick MDF, high density, heavy. So glued it down, smoothed it out till everything was just in position. And then I took my pencil and I just traced around the edge using the lip of the Mylar as a guide. So I basically transferred the shape of this Mylar sheet to this wooden form. Another thing that I did that's very important is I transferred the center line out onto the extra wood that would be here. I transferred that center line out. I put a tick mark there. And I put a tick mark in the rear where it comes through, right there. So you can see the center line runs this. And this is by the designer. He put the center line right there. So I marked that on my blank piece of wood. I also put a tick mark here and here. This shows where the main spar is. Same thing with the rear spar, the flap spar, the aileron spar. Now once I peel this back, I can take my straight edge, line up my tick marks, and I could put, and you can see that I did that. I got my line for my rear spar, my flap spar, my aileron spar. I've got my center line indicated, and so on and so forth. Then finally, the last thing I did is I took a punch, very sharp punch, and I located each one of these holes. On here, looks like I didn't locate those because they weren't indicated on the drawing. I actually measured and located those from the plans. But these holes here, anywhere there's a mark on the Mylar drawing, I transferred it over. Then I transferred over the jig pin hole that they indicate there, and I think he shows another one down here. Yep. So all these holes are transferred over. And once that's done, I peeled my Mylar plan off because the very lightweight stickiness of the glue allows me to peel it off. Then I rough cut this to size, rough cut it on a bandsaw, that bandsaw to be exact. And then using a sanding table, which I don't have, but I borrowed one from a friend, I very carefully sanded this edge right up to the line I put on there. Very, very carefully. Then I had my basic outline of my wing rib. I had my spar locations already marked on it, so on and so forth. I had my lightning hole locations for the most part marked in. These I measured by hand and put them in there. And of course you've got the center line, so that's a reference point. You've got these vertical lines, they're reference points, and you can just do the math on the plans and locate them. As a matter of fact, here is the plans showing those holes that we just looked at. And of course this is the rear spar. It says right there, rear spar. I've got that marked on my plan, so all I have to do is measure over, do the math, and the scale on this is 1/2. So if it's 2 inches on this drawing here, it's 4 inches on the master plug. And then see right here, this line is the center line of the rib, which I drew in already here, which I pulled from the mast. So now I know how far this way and I know how far up this way, mark a hole, so on and so forth. You can see how it works out. So now that I have the master rib made, every other rib pattern is made from this master rib. Now my first thought was, if I continue to use this master rib in production, I'm going to damage it. It's going to end up become damaged, and I don't want the master to be damaged. So I've actually made an exact copy of this rib. So the first thing I did is on a vertical mill, and you could do it on a drill press. You can even do it by hand, but I had access to a mill, so I used it. We milled in these holes right on center, and I put these 1/4 inch ID bushings in these holes to use as drill guides. So when I drill holes through here, I don't wear out the hole and end up getting slop. Ultimately, that turned out to be a little overkill, but that's kind of how I roll. So anyways, once I've made this master rib, all I had to do is lay this on top of another piece of MDF, drill a hole and put a pin there for that jig pin, and drill a hole and put a pin here for this jig pin. And then now the two boards are locked together. I draw around it with my pencil, trim it to rough size on my bandsaw again, put them back together with a couple of pins, and then run the whole thing through the router table with the flush cut bit. And now I have two ribs exactly the same. So that's how I duplicated that. And then, don't mind me for a second, I gotta grab something here. So hot in my garage, the sweat's starting to run into my eyes. I gotta wipe my face off. So now that I have a duplicate of the master rib, and I transferred all the holes, all the hole markings, and these two holes right here, these are, for those who don't understand those holes, those two holes are these two marks right here. And that's the center line of this, or the center of this arc, and that's the center of this arc. So if you make an arc here using that center, and an arc here using that center, and then connect the tops and the bottoms, you'll get your oblong hole. Okay? Alright. Once I made my working master, if you will, this master gets stowed, and all my work is off my working master, but we're going to use this master as a template for what we're doing next. So the next thing I needed to do is I needed to make forms to cut out my rib blanks. And that's what this is. This is a nose rib blank. Now, when you look at the plans, I'm going to call the spar center line a nominal measurement. Even though it's 32 thousandths, it's only 16 thousandths either side of center. I'm going to call that as nominal. I'm just going to use that line as a center line. Now, if you look on your spar, you'll notice that, and here you can see it, in some places you have 2 layers of cap strips. You can see this is a step down from 2 to 1. And in some places you have 1 layer, which is right here, and in some places you have no layers. So all the way down here at the root, you can see 2 layers all the way down, cruising on down, and then it drops to 1 layer here. Excuse me, a little close, 1 layer there. And of course it drops to 1 layer there, so you have to make some adjustments in the way that you do these, but it'll all make sense when you start doing it. Anyways, because of that, you're going to have 3 different size nose rib blanks. You're going to have a full size one, the one that goes where there's no cap strips. Then you have one that's an 1/8 short and one that's a 1/4 short. So how I did it is I started with a blank piece of wood, and I lined that piece of wood, the edge of it, right up with that center line right there. Lined it up, and then I clamped them together. Then I flipped the piece over and I back drilled these pilot holes here and here, and I pinned these 2 together. So now I've got this edge is perfectly lined up with that straight edge right there, like that. And then these pinholes are there, and then what I did is once I got them pinned together, I flipped this whole menagerie over. So imagine that it's flipped over now. Oh, and I can't do it because I'm holding the phone with my one hand. And then, using the magic washer, which I described in another video, I added a 5/16 inch flange all the way around. And you can see that right there. You can see it's 5/16 bigger. Flange all the way around. Then I took and I cut it out on that bandsaw. I milled off, where is it? I milled off or cut off that 5/16 piece. But you can see that the flange doesn't go all the way to the nose. Okay? So now what I did, and you know, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I didn't actually make this one first. I made one like this first, which is, you know, pretty much the same size. And then working with just the smaller one instead of the great big master one, I made this one here by, again, lining up the rear edges and then pinning them together. Anyways, the flange doesn't come all the way to the nose, and that's illustrated in the plans as well. That was another question I got today. You can see it right there. Again, you can use the center line of the rib, which is indicated here, and we have it on our master rib. And you can use, you know, a measurement. Scale is, where is it? 1/2 inch. So you just measure from here over to here and do the math, and that's going to tell you how far. And then you can see that this line is pretty much vertical, like so. So that tells you how far to measure over on your nose rib to set this vertical line right here. Okay? It's not super mission critical, but you want to get it as good as you can. But once you have this master rib, you can make all your other parts from it. And once, you know, eventually I ended up with a master nose rib. This is not one of them. And I made all my nose rib parts from that, and so on and so forth. Now, a minute ago we talked about being full length, 1/4, and 1/8 short. So what I did to accomplish that was I made a master that was full length. And from the master I made my 1/8 and 1/4 short templates. And the way I made them was I made them all full length, and then I used a flush trim bit with a 1/16 of an inch undersized bearing. So you'd make a pass and the bearing would ride, you know, on the edge up here, and everything where the bearing rides would stay the same size. Everything below it would be milled away a 1/16. So you mill off a 1/16, you flip it over. Now you've got a little 1/16 hump sticking out here, and you drive this in, and now it mills off everything on this edge less a 1/16, which ends up being an 1/8 on this side. So once you've made 2 passes, you're going to have this thing reduced by an 1/8, except for right at the very top where there's going to be a 1/16 of an inch flange sticking out. Then you put your flush trim bearing back on, so everything's flush. Flip the thing back over and you mill off that 1/16, and now you've reduced this edge exactly 1/8. So if you need to do an 1/8 short one, you've done that. If you need to do a 1/16 one, you do that whole process one more time, and now you reduce it another 1/8, which is a 1/4. And that's how I'm making my form boards, either full length, a 1/4, or an 1/8 short. So hopefully that helps you there. Again, when I made this form, I lined it up on the master template. Again, lining up the straight edge right here with that, like so. Now, I can't do it one-handed, but you get the idea. Pin it, draw it, trim it using the flush trim bit. So now you have a board such as this. Such as this. And there's your full-size pattern for flanging. Now again, it was lined up with the front with the vertical lines, then drilled and pinned. Then I used a straight edge to transfer this line off of the rib here to here, and then very carefully cut that and trimmed it till it was exactly matching. And then of course, using the router, you can cut the edges flush. So now you have an exact copy of the center rib section. And so it goes all the way on down the line, making the patterns. And of course, whenever you have to have a flange pattern, you add a 1/16 of an inch using the magic washer. And you guys know what the magic washer is, right? I'll demonstrate right here. I happen to have a washer. Let me grab a pen so you can see it. But let's say that you wanted to get this out of the way. You wanted to add a 1/16 of an inch flange on here. Well, you get a washer that has a 1/16 of an inch distance between the edge of the outside of the circle and the edge of the inner edge of the hole. And then you just simply put your washer against your piece. You stick your ink pen or your Sharpie in there, push it against the deal, and just roll it along. And as you can see, that makes a perfect line, whatever the distance is on the washer, to make a flange. So if you have, if I need to make the flange piece for this one, it was obviously going to be a 1/16 of an inch or 9/16 of an inch wider on either side. All I have to do is just line it up like I did here, line it up here like I did. Then before I rough cut it, I just flip the whole thing over, run my washer against the edge, and make my mark for my flange. It's pretty straightforward stuff. And that's how I made my form blocks. And every block, I made a form for every size rib. If the rib was a 1/16 of an inch, or excuse me, an 1/8 inch short here, I would make a master and then reduce the master by an 1/8. If the rib was a 1/4 inch short here, I would make a master and reduce it by a 1/4 by using the flush trim bit and a undersized guide bearing. Your local wood shop will be able to help you with that. That's how I did it. That's how it was done. There's only one rib on the rear spar, because you can see these cap strips on the rear spar. 1/8 inch cap strips go the full length of the rear spar all the way out to the tip. There's only one rib on the rear spar that's actually a quarter short, and that's the root rib. And I just discovered that 2 days ago. I wouldn't make a special fixture just to make the root rib. I would go ahead and cut it. I cut mine on a bandsaw and then cleaned it up with a sanding wheel, and it's perfect. I wouldn't go through the extra effort of making another set of tools just for that. But again, all my tooling is paid off because everything is sitting in my fixture square and even and neat. So hopefully that helps the guy who needed help on how I did this and how I located my holes. Remember, once you have this master form with the center line and the vertical sections marked off for your spars and so on and so forth, once you have all of that, you'll be able to make any part you need, and you can replicate them over and over and over again because everything is jig pinned to these form blocks here and here. And you can see those rig pins. There's a rig pin hole right there where that was formed on, and there's the other one up there. So it all works real nice and slick. Hopefully that answers the question that he had, and maybe gives you some insight on how this works. But everything you need to know is on these drawings. Oh, he asked me about the size of the lightning holes. Well, again, all you have to do is measure and do the math. The scale of this drawing is 1/2. So if this is a 3-inch hole here, it's probably 1.5 inches from the center to that. So on and so forth. It's pretty straightforward. It's not difficult. Everything you need to know is in these plans. Sometimes you look at them and you get overwhelmed. You can't tell what the hell's going on. But if you read what it tells you and you take note of the scale and you look for the little Easter eggs that are hidden all over here, you'll get the information you need. It'll all work out. All right, Bearhawk fans, hopefully that helped the fellow that needed help and shed a little light on the process. I have probably 2.5 sheets, 4x8 sheets of MDF, 1-inch MDF, all milled up into these various sizes. But that's what helped me make all my parts and patterns, and that's what makes this project go together now. So, you know, the first year of this project I was basically building a kit. Now that I've built the kit for the wing, now I'm going to build the wing, which we are doing right here. All right, till we see you next time in the shop. Hope all is well, and we'll see you then.